Hi, this is the Better Relationships Through Research podcast, and I'm your host, marriage and family therapist, Daniel Dashnaw. I have a great conversation in store with Dr. Chris Donaghue. We're going to be talking about attachment, differentiation, what it means to be human, and how we change and grow and affect each other, and whether or not culture, capitalism, and expectation have a role in what we get out of our relationships. Chris, great to see you.
You as well. Thanks for having me. Let's get into it.
All right. Hi, this is the Better Relationships Through Research podcast, and I'm your host, marriage and family therapist, Daniel Dashnaw. Today I have a special guest, Dr. Chris Donaghue, a psychotherapist, media personality, author of Rebel Love and Sex Outside the Lines. Uh, Dr. Donoghue's known for a very sex positive attitude, unflinching honesty, and he challenges the notion of monogamy, which Americans do love, sort of in theory. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate the in theory part, but great to be here. Great to be here.
Good. I want to start with my first question. You said that I was thinking about actually John Money, who was a
Yes.
noted thinker back in the 90s who talked about a love map. And you said that this is more of a situation of erotic templates being installed. How does your thinking sort of digress from Dr. Money or other approaches or thinking about how we become attracted to what we think is sexy?
I haven't heard John Money's name said in a very long time, so I love the reference. That's great. He's a solid figure from the past. Wow. Um, that threw me off. I haven't heard that in so long. God, it's such a good question. I approach it from a couple of different angles. Let me be very annoying first in my initial approach. So everything I do, I have a mission statement that has slowly been refined over time working clinically. And I'd love to actually hear if you have a version of this as well. I try to depathologize working with relationships, but also sexuality. So many people carry so much shame around the creative and diverse ways that they move through the world. And sexuality tends to be one of those. And we all want to feel normal, right? That tends to be some common thread in it all. So when I'm working with someone around what they're turned on by, I generally avoid looking at why, which is a really interesting thing for a psychotherapist to say because psychotherapy traditionally is so insight centered, which of course my work also seeks to be, because sometimes that is still embedded in there, the idea that there has to be a why or that there must be something pathological if it's a creative, diverse sexual style that someone has. And one of the things that's been really profound for me in my work, when I travel and I lecture, I'm also an institute instructor for a group called the Sexual Health Alliance. We certify individuals in sex therapy so they can become certified international sex therapists. And when I travel and I lecture, one of the things I share with them is Pornhub, which is a porn search engine. They put out data every year and they share what are around the world. And they really break it down very beautifully to different demographics, gendered, different states, different countries. One of the things that they have is they have a sample size of millions because there
Mhm,
are millions of users every day. So they have a really great handle on what are the key terms that people are using in looking for their pornography.
mhm.
And in my mind, pornography and fantasy are really great indicators of someone's more honest or authentic sexuality. It's private, right? We don't have to consider relational and other implications. And what they show over and over, they don't present it as such, but the real powerful takeaway is no one is searching for sex with my wife, in missionary, in our marital bed, making love while the birds are singing the sun. No one. Everything is pretty freaking kinky. So we are far kinkier than we want to admit or acknowledge. And that's the most interesting part of it all for me. So I use that angle to really just help people instill confidence in whatever it is that they're turned on by sexually.
I'm glad you mentioned that because on my blog, I write about research and I think about research, and I came across a piece of research that I'm not sure it was done by Porn Hub, but it was researchers sort of like analyzing Pornhub. And what they commented on was there's been a marked uptick in aggression
Mm,
in pornography. But at the same time, I found another piece of research that was about women like wanting more aggression in their sexuality. So it became, in my mind, sort of a research chicken and egg question
mm.
of is pornography shaping sexual taste, or is sexual taste shaping pornography?
I think it's both, right? And it becomes the chicken and egg. Really hard to suss out which might have led to what. But I think it's very much a feedback loop because we'll also see showing up in porn as well cultural. I don't know really what the word is, but whatever's happened culturally, you will also start to see the impact within porn. During COVID, we started to see a rise in porn that involved individuals wearing masks and protective suits and protective gear that started to become eroticized when Trump first really made a political presence way back at the first election of his. There was also a rise in political and Trump related porn. So
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting cultural artifact porn because as you're kind of pointing out, it can reflect back maybe cultural, social events and moments that are happening.
Mhm.
Could it be about women's empowerment and subjectification? Is it about the rise in feminism pushing back on patriarchy? Is it women taking the tools of patriarchy and making them theirs and adding pleasure to it and sexualizing it? Like a lot of really odd angles one could take, but I think it's hard to separate out the two. And I think it's very much kind of that feedback loop.
That's what I was thinking too, especially when I saw the research on uptick in sexual aggression. Now, nominally on the surface, we could clutch our pearls about something like that, say, "Oh my word, pornography is distorting human sexuality." But then there's another piece of research that says, "Yeah, women like more aggression. That the research is clear about this, and the men are okay with it as long as the women are okay with it." But that reframes the very notion of what kind of aggression we're actually talking about
That's right.
in the first place.
Yeah.
Which brings me to the question of, monogamy and morality and your manifesto. So if you
Mm,
could sort of, like, maybe speak about that through the lens of your manifesto, that
sure.
would really appreciate that.
Just speak very quickly to what you mean by monogamy with morality. What do you mean when you connect those two?
Well, is this the last social contract that we just take for granted and just assume, "Well, that's just the way it is." Well, let me give you my lens of this, and
Sure,
you probably have already checked me out on the blog, have seen this
I
a little
did.
bit. I'm a marriage and family therapist, but I identify as more of a family therapist than, like, a couples therapist per se. Um, and as a result of my thinking about that, I think about the impact that the choices that we make around fidelity, around constancy, and the impact it has on children in terms of giving them a sense of reliability and a sense of being able to count on the bestowed attention of their parents, being a united front and nobody's leaving, to be with somebody else, for example.
Yeah.
So I see kind of human sexuality through a greater lens of familial responsibility and predictability for children.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I think you and I, although we might use different languaging, actually have a similar stance because I'm really influenced by a lot of attachment theory work, going back all the way to maybe Bowlby and Ainsworth's direct,
Mhm.
research, and now the at times very odd translation of pop culture's version of attachment theory. But I think the core tenets of it, for me, align with what you just said: consistency, predictability, reliability, um, a secure base, a safe haven, knowing that you're there, you're staying there, you'll be there. I very much support that. What's really interesting is the monogamy concept for me within my own career is fascinating. When I first entered media, whatever that even means, when I first started putting my thoughts out there, I guess I'll say, um, I very much took a position of activist. And it was really important to me back then, which is when my first book was published. I call it back then because it's probably about a decade ago.
Okay.
I was an activist. I was very much a rebel rouser. And I was working with a lot of individuals who had been very pathologized and shamed for, again, I keep using the same languaging for a reason, for having
Yeah.
very creative, diverse interests relationally and in
Mhm.
terms of sexual expression. And so it became really important to me at that time to really legitimize and speak to the health that can exist in non monogamy and things like that. I still stand behind that because I think that there is a really beautiful, healthy way to create consistent and predictable structure within a family unit in a non-monogamous context. And I work with some therapists that themselves have done that and, really beautifully done. But I think it's the rare one that can do that because it requires a lot of communication, a lot of honesty, a lot of effort. And I do think that monogamy has a lot of beauty to it. And I also think that the to use David Schnarch's languaging, I think the crucible that it can be created in a primary monogamous relationship really has a high potential of growing someone up profoundly. And I know you're a fan because I know you're a fan of Bader and Pearson, and I love their work as well. And that's what made me interested in sitting with you is you talking about their work as well because I don't hear it enough. And so I think monogamy is powerful. And I think it's probably what's best for a lot of people. I think the management of multiple relationships is quite complex and difficult. And I think it can allow us to bypass the work that a monogamous structure would force us to encounter. I don't work with families and I don't work with children. I work exclusively with couples and individuals. But that part of it's really important to me, the family impact. So I guess all that rambling to just say that my stance on monogamy is a little bit different now than it was back then. Stand behind all that I said, but I really think that there's a balance to it. And we're in a time when the younger generations are less interested, it seems, in my research and in my clinical experience in monogamy. So it is important that we develop some healthy models for how to pull off non monogamy. Um, but I'm currently in a monogamous relationship.
Well, that's very impressive, and, the reason why I'm saying that's impressive is because, my own thinking about this has evolved, initially from rather, hostile to poly. At one point, I said, "Show me one civilization based upon, like, multiple partners. I dare you." Uh, uh, but I've softened my position since that considerably because I found that some of the most fascinating and novel ideas about relationship are coming from, the LGBTQ communities, some fascinating ideas. Um, like, for example, the sense of culturally enforced timelines. Like, okay, so you leave school at this time and you get married around this time, and here's the best time to have a baby, and right? It's almost like the culture has got everything mapped out for you, and it wasn't the heteros that said, "Hey, isn't that kind of oppressive?" It was rather the community that took a step back and say, "Yeah, we're willing to question just about anything and everything." I came across a word recently that made me realize that some of this creativity isn't just having nothing better to do, but these marginalized community have to come up with terms to describe things that otherwise don't even exist. Like I just learned about the term almond sexual, and
Oh.
like,
Oh,
I
listen,
for, for
I for a long time tried to keep up with every new term for both gender and sexuality, and I've given up on that because
well, I
daily.
probably will in about 6 months from now when I watch this podcast again. But right now, I'm still fascinated
Yes,
by the nuanced thinking that's
yes,
out there, and
yes,
especially the need, Chris, to create a language.
yes.
In the work that I do a lot of work with neurodiverse couples,
Mhm.
and family work with neurodiverse couples. And sometimes I find it's necessary to create a shared language instead of borrowing the language or the cultural scripts that are just sort of handed to us to have. So this is making me take a step back.
Yeah. That was so beautifully said because I agree and have had a similar experience. My own research in and my own experience working clinically with and my own life experience of having attempted to at different times participate in different structures. Um, the poly world really lent an understanding of better communication and some other tools for monogamy and monogamous couples in a way that monogamy itself couldn't have developed. And I so agree with you in that these marginalized and fringe identities and whatnot had to pave their own way. And in doing so, I've really given a lot of permission to a lot of people to, as we say, step off the relational escalator, that it's dating, marriage, live together, white picket fence, 2.5 children, and just this mapped out future, right?
Yeah.
That might not be what you want or serve you, but you never knew that you had another option or alternative pathways. Um, so when I'm working with new clinicians, I will say to them, whether they're interested in working with polyamory or non-monogamy, read the really great research and learn all of these amazing skills that we can take back to monogamy in such a beautiful, powerful way. So that's been my education around it as well.
I had the opportunity on a number of occasions to meet Dr. Schnarch and talk to him before he passed. And one of the things that fascinates me about him is, and this takes us back to Bader Pearson again, is the notion of differentiation
Yes.
versus attachment. Now, I notice you keenly focused that you see things through an attachment lens, and I was hoping that you could explain to me through that lens how do you see notions of differentiation as Schnarch and Bader Pearson developed it.
I love this question. I in my head So I heard a podcast once where they had a differentiation based therapist essentially debate a attachment, emotionally focused therapist.
Mhm.
And they were presenting the two as incompatible. And that is when I found Bader Pearson, which is the rare work. And you step into this as well, but there's not many people that are bringing the two together. And I saw them naturally as, in my mind, the way I frame it is two poles.
Mm.
What I mean in saying that is the way I enter it is attachment is about your interpersonal, and differentiation, although it takes place within the interpersonal, is about the intrapersonal. So for me, I use the differentiation as your relationship to yourself while in a relationship to other, and the attachment really being about how you manage relationality and intimacy.
That makes a lot of oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you for that. It also gives me a lot to think about. And I also wanted to talk about, we talked about the notion of emotion. I wanna talk about, compersion. Now, the
Yes.
first time I encountered that term was in the poly community, and it absolutely infuriated me because I felt that they were making up an emotion until I actually bothered to actually study it more deeply, and I realized that no, compersion also has an application within monogamy, as well, and, it's really talking about something completely differently. I noticed that, I have worked with couples from time to time, but it was more of an accident of them finding me and wanting to work with me than my actually putting myself out there as a poly therapist. And this notion of the willies, this notion of this anxiety, and the feeling to need to be compersive, like compersion was somehow a required virtue or a moral act within a poly framework, had me realize what you said earlier, and this I didn't think I heard clearly enough, is that this isn't monogamy versus poly. This isn't a battle of ideas for the soul of the world. It's rather a situation where monogamy for many people is easier because it takes a great deal of effort to swim against the tide in a perpetual exhausting fashion, as I'm coming to realize that so many, sexual minorities have to, especially in this culture.
Oh, so much in what you just said. I not that familiar with his work, but I did read M. Scott Peck's The Road Less Traveled. And beautiful book. I don't remember a lot about it, but I remember one thing and it stuck with me. And it relates to compersion and how I kind of conceptualize it. M. Scott Peck in The Road Less Traveled, not in depth, almost very quickly within a paragraph or two, breezes through this interesting concept that I later found out is more of a psychoanalytic concept, but he uses it very differently. Long story short, it's called cathexis. And his definition of cathexis would be almost the opposite of compersion. And it was really interesting for me to even apply to my own life. And what he says is in his definition of cathexis is it's often a framework that maybe we misinterpret for love. And that cathexis is when we love people within the confines of what's comfortable for us. And he would use the example of a pet. And although I challenge this next statement, let's just go with it for clarification of the concept that you would say you love your pet, but you love them to the limits of your comfort. You don't prioritize their growth to your detriment. You want them off the table. You want them to stop barking when you're frustrated and there's limits. Where compersion is really about you finding happiness in their happiness, sometimes to your detriment, right? You're uncomfortable with them going out with their boyfriend or girlfriend and you are their husband or wife, but because they're happy doing so, you're happy. And that is such an evolved empathy and that is the opposite of cathexis, where I love you within the realm of what's comfortable. And this is now differentiation comes in. Can you
Yes.
take the hit, right?
Yes.
Can you
You
let
take
that moment grow you up,
Yep.
right? I love that because all of these concepts swirl around. And so compersion becomes such a beautiful goal, even in monogamy, to love that which your partner loves because they love it even to your detriment, and to differentiate as a result of or because of or within, and really let yourself be disrupted in service of. What a beautiful concept.
It is to a point, but it also has within it a problematic notion of dashed expectations. Um, so my struggle with understanding compersion was, sometimes I would, meet a couple and their original, coming together was a monogamy sort of contract. And then along the way, one of them describes what happens to them as an evolution or a growth, and they want to open things up, so to speak. Well, one of the ways that I think about this and very reductionist sort of thinking as a couples therapist is, well, in infidelity, when somebody steps outside and gets revealed or gets caught or confesses or whatever, it's very convenient for couples therapists to say, well, the old marriage is dead. Something has come along and changed things. And now you have to decide if you're going to stay together, what are the new rules?
Mhm.
Are the rules that we're going to go back to coloring within the lines, or are we going to just draw a whole new picture? I mean, what is actually going on here? And this brings us to the point of compersion may be a lofty goal, but how often attainably is it?
Is that a rhetorical question or a literal?
No, it's a serious question.
How
Like
possible is that? I struggle. I appreciate the struggle you pose within it, and I agree with you. I somehow feel I'm personalizing this, like I'm trying to sit in your question as a person in a relationship and in the relational world. I think it depends on the individual because I think of how, and again, it depends how personal I even want to get. But my work has very much been on my relational abilities and moving away from a traditional American individualistic upbringing in the family I was a part of. So I'm constantly trying to work on my relational lens. So for me, compersion becomes a really beautiful goal to attempt to get as close to as I can, as does differentiation. And so for me, it becomes just a beautiful opportunity. I don't want to keep using the same words, but I use it as an opportunity to differentiate, to set boundaries when needed, and to call out impact something might be having on me. But at the same time, as someone who co parents me, and as someone who has a pet, and as someone who has a partner, to really try to extend myself. And compersion becomes this really beautiful attribute.
so you see it as aspirational in a sense.
Yeah, almost like differentiation as a
Right.
position you never reach, but as an aspiration and as a beautiful model that really challenges what I think often is some problematic American norms and ideals.
I think the number one norm it challenges is that relationship and love should be easy.
Yes.
It should be
Yes.
comfortable.
Yes, and yet it should disrupt. That's the way I always frame it, that you can't form relationship thinking the person will drop in and life is seamless and moves on as was or as
Yes.
is, but it should disrupt, right?
Yes, I
Meaningfully
totally
disrupt.
endorse that, and
Yes.
let me explain to you how I see that. I wanna go back to pets for a moment.
Sure.
When I do therapy, sometimes my dog is with me. His name is Bob. He's 17. He's incontinent, he's blind, and he bites. Now, I only got Bob about 2 years ago because my cousin, who was Bob's mom, passed away, and his dad didn't wanna live with a dog that was incontinent, blind, and bites. So I stepped in and took Bob knowing everything there was to know about him, uh, and I decided to love him anyway, not because of his own merit or lack thereof as a pet. I'm often of saying he's the worst pet I've ever had from a functional point of view, but rather he's a symbol of family to me. And that makes me think that in a way, um, maybe relationships have a symbolic dimension to them that we sometimes may need to disabuse ourselves of, that we're being oppressed by our expectations, but not only, like, framing them as expectations, but also sort of, like, intrinsic sort of cultural sort of indicators, like, this is the way things are supposed to be. And I reject, this notion of change not because, I don't wanna grow, but because I don't see growth in a relationship as something I necessarily signed up for. I fell in love with you because I was comfortable with you, you made me feel safe, life was easy with you, and I knew what that meant, and you seemed to agree with me. But now you're throwing me this curve that you wanna open things up. I no longer feel safe, I no longer feel attended to, and my expectations have been violated. In other words, you're kind of a bad pet.
And go back to you saying, "I don't like the word change." Were you saying that as you a therapist or as the person in this example who's being asked to open?
As a person, as example, I was sort of giving
Got it.
voice to what I hear, and I
Sure,
should have
sure,
made
sure.
that more clear, I
Sure, that's okay.
apologize.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
was giving voice to what I commonly hear, which is, we're in relationships to pursue some sense of emotional regulation, some sense
Yes,
of neurobiological safety,
yes.
and expectation, and to enjoy the bestowed attention of our beloved. If our beloved says, "Well, I only have so much finite human attention, you're no longer gonna get this slice, but this slice is going somewhere else." That could be functionally traumatic.
But that's why I love the differentiation then attachment perspective, because I think in that example, the person is not saying this outright, but they believe that relationships are about total gratification, right? And safety. And relationships are actually neither. Those are lofty goals and aspirations, and at best momentary or timely. And I then, because now I'm very much centering myself, I don't know why, but you've brought that part very dominant. I would then, in my own mind, if I was that individual in that struggle, I then bring in the differentiation arm, which is again, how can this experience grow me up? What is my work as a result in within this? And this might be where you said compersion could be a problem. Because would I, in that example, possibly be allowing something, the opening up of my marriage, that might not be right or best for me under the guise of compersion, which is supposed to always be a beautiful thing. And perhaps I'm supposed to say, no, no, we're not opening up. No, I'm not supporting that. No, I'm not okay with that. So I think there always needs to be a little bit of a deeper question than just saying conversion's always great and anything tough is differentiation and play, let it grow you up, right? That's quite lazy and not nuanced. But I take that on right now. I'm really in this place in my life where I'm trying to let everything grow me up. So I'm almost to a fault maybe saying when in doubt I'm going to grow versus whatever else, and that might not be right for others. Let's keep it personal for a second. How do you occupy that? Where do you as a person in your own life or in the own world kind of sit with attachment versus differentiation in your own use?
To get very personal, I had an extremely traumatic childhood. My biological mother sold me for $500 to people who raised me, and were abusive. As an alcoholic household, it was very violent. I ran away and got married at 19. It was when my son was born. And I was in that marriage for 23 years. Then I left that marriage for another one almost immediately, and spent another 23 years in that marriage. And then I spent 5 years living in the woods on my own, trying to grow myself up and
Wow.
figure out what happens next for me. And as a therapist, I decided to be sort of like public about that struggle. And I write about things like that rather freely. I see a developmental piece to it in that people who are traumatized will often make a fetish out of safety. And one of the things that I'm troubled by, not only as a survivor, if you will, of childhood trauma, but also as a therapist, is how do I recognize or call out, if you will, the fetish that we make of safety? Why is growth the poor stepchild to
Mm,
safety in American culture? Um, I mean, it goes without saying that as much as I embrace and love your stance about growth, you and I hold a considerably minority position with the culture at large, which makes a fetish of safety. And as a result of that, I often see traumatized clients who are in their own ways extremely abusive to their partners because they feel that their safety is like the center of gravity in the relationship. It
yes.
might be even the reason why they chose their partner in the first place because that particular partner perhaps made them feel safe in a way that they are determined to continue, even if it frustrates their own growth and their partner's growth.
Yes. One of the most powerful things I heard earlier on in my career, and I'm thankful for it, was a very quick soundbite. I tend to be most inspired by very quick sound bites that weren't necessarily the point of even what was being said, and they like
Mm.
lodge. Is a psychoanalyst who said the number one piece of work for anyone who suffered trauma is to not act their trauma out on other people. And that just smacked me because you're in a way talking about that in the fetishization of security, which again, I don't know that you ever fully get or as an adult can expect. You hopefully should have as a child, although you won't most likely either. But that would
Yeah.
be the idealized place where you could seek having had that or should. But as an adult, you won't and you can't and you don't. And so I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I don't think the way through should be non monogamy or polyamory either.
I had a situation once with a client. They met in a seminary school or missionary school. And they became ESL teachers in I think it was like in Vietnam or Southeast Asia. And he started going to massage parlors on a regular basis and then told his wife, well, I want to open things up, so to speak. So, can you comment on the role of like religion, and for that matter, like economic systems like capitalism in terms of what passes for a sense of sexual morality?
The sexual morality thing, I'm not often asked anything that has that word in
I
it, so
know I'm
that part
throwing you a curve here.
you are. The minute you landed with that part, that throws me around. So, you want me to reflect on non-monogamy and openness within the context of, like, our capitalist system and its relationship to sexual morality.
Well, let me give you
Sure,
some help on how I think about this here. Maybe you
sure.
comment on this. Um, I wish I was the person who coined it, but somebody coined the frame limbic capitalism, uh, which is anything that makes you feel good that people make coin from.
Okay,
Porn, alcohol, legalized marijuana,
okay,
et cetera.
okay.
Um, that's what I mean by the capitalist end of the situation.
Yes, yes,
Religion is just like sort of like uh, a, a, a holding space for expectations. Why did she choose her partner from religious school? Because she was looking for a religious man. It was one of her criteria.
yeah,
She was looking for something more than morality or her notion of it. She was looking for a functional predictability with a shared value system.
yes,
And she described her heart being broken not merely because he cheated, but because that the entire framework by which she selected him in the first place turned out to be fallacious and tainted, as she pointed.
Yeah, choosing someone based on a shared ideology like religion actually often winds up being a very flimsy thread of connection,
That's what
right?
I told
Because
her, but I'm interested in what
yeah,
you have to say.
it doesn't necessarily speak to or promise anything in a way that one might expect or assume. It's so flimsy. And I also want to always bring in, like, I don't know how you feel about this concept, but like the like patriarchy and the patriarchal impact of all that as well, where I work with a lot of men, and their work is about really stepping away from their patriarchal training as to what that means to be a man. And when you bring in capitalism and their sense of putting finance before family, right?
Yeah.
I use this clunky word of I can't I said it far better, but it was something like work narcissism, right? Just attempting to combine this self-centeredness that comes with the idea of putting work, productivity, and finance before your family, and this idea of let's no longer make it acceptable and everyone nods along, affirming the idea that you missed your son's soccer game because you had to work, and we
Mhm.
valorize that and like we shouldn't. So I feel like I'm already kind of starting to somewhat work through your very gigantic but important question with so many key concepts woven in there. I think our morality's off. I think capitalism has been a system that has very much led us astray and really put our focus on the wrong goals. And when we look at the robust research we have on happiness, all of it consistently challenges that once you have certain basic needs met, that any increase in finance doesn't necessarily promise a better life or happiness, right? It always kind of brings us back to things like relationality. So what was the direct, though, core question you were asking? How do I just
Well,
negotiate
well,
all those concepts?
my core question is, well, I think you answered it in part, one of which was that, a shared set of rigid values that you expect your partner to adhere to is kind of turning them into a pet, is to reference what we
Yes.
said earlier, in that it's like, there are do's and don'ts. If you want to stay with me, and if you violate my expectations, then our relationship is in jeopardy. As opposed to, oh, it's like what Gottman said about to make a point about nervous system regulation. He had this intervention called the two babies. And the first baby is a photograph of a baby with wide open eyes, with a sense of wonder on its face, saying, "What's this?" And it's openness to new ideas. It's a willingness to engage in a back and forth. And the other baby is, "What the hell is this?" Which is a baby that's got a frown that says, "Hey, I don't like this. I want to win. I want to prevail over you,
Mm,
and I want you to go along with me." So I see part of the issue as not only a question of maturity, but also of emotional regulation. And that's kind of something here that I think is probably opens up a greater question than possibly can be answered. But I wanted to say one thing that you said earlier that I think is important. I believe that relationships are necessary so that we can grow within them and be influenced by our partners. And I think you
yes,
share that belief that no matter
yes,
what happens, it's that willingness to be changed by your partner, the willingness
yes.
to confront your own assumptions and say, "Oh, what's this?"
Yes, because there's nothing as confronting as that relationship, right? It's, of course, more complex and nuanced than this, but I love the cliche that relational work really is done in relationship. It really, both parenthood and primary partnership, really, if we let it, have the best capacity being a mirror held up and showing us what our wounds and our work is. And I think another complex concept, and I'd love to see your thoughts around this because it's one of the things that I'm still figuring out in my own head, but I think is a very problematic misunderstood concept, is needs versus wants. When I hear someone saying my needs aren't getting met, and they're talking just about wants and this, right? And how it ends so many relationships. And a lot of people affirmatively nod, oh, he wasn't meeting your needs. It's really good you left that relationship, without ever interrogating, were those needs? Were those needs that were for you to meet? Are those needs even meetable?
I'm smiling because you and I are totally on the same page around this. I believe that in American culture, we use those terms sloppily and interchangeably.
Yes.
And I think you're right in making that a very keen distinction, that there are relational needs, and there are relationship wants, and there are relationship nice to haves. And often we just think that it's all sort of one thing. And to a certain extent, our nervous systems are sometimes stupid enough to reinforce that notion. Gottman talks about sort of negative sentiment override and positive sentiment override. And I don't think it's because he was a mathematician before he became a psychologist, but he basically said the has no pity. If you can maintain a 5-to-1 ratio of 5 positive encounters to 1 negative, you'll remain in a positive sentiment override, and you'll be able to roll with the times when you overdraw your accounts emotionally briefly. But if you're making withdrawal upon withdrawal upon withdrawal, with no deposits, then the
Mhm.
felt sense is a negative sentiment override, which leads to
Yes.
relational collapse.
Yes.
Um, Now, that may be a very simple way of putting it, but he's talking about the nervous system, which is extremely functions in a very simple kind of way. And
Yes.
a lot of the talk about growth and being influenced and what's this as opposed to what the hell is this is a contrarian sort of notion. It's almost as if maybe humanity is sort of aspiring to new emotions, new feelings. I remember being emotionally impacted by reading about ancient Roman virtues that have become extinct largely in modern times, like pietas. We get the word piety from it, but
Yeah.
doesn't mean at all what the Latin was. Pietas means I understand my life is operating in a larger context, and there might be things I may need to deny myself in order to move civilization further along. We don't have any sense
Mm.
of that now because we have wants and needs and desires and nice to
Yes.
haves, and we don't seem to be able to even want to entertain making these distinctions.
No,
Um,
because
think-
that capitalistic concept comes back in again about what's in this for me and can
mm,
I make money from it, right? And your that reference to what sounds to me like a really beautiful virtue or emotion to try to like I'd love to learn more about that, but takes me to some of the Eastern philosophy that has been meaningful to me in my own life because it does start to speak to concepts like that. Um, even yeah. I mean, I think that's such beautiful work. It's just it also places us back in the context of what's happening in our clients as we see them now with therapy becoming more and more just cognitive behavioral and superficial and short term and managed care shrinking it down. We don't even have the ability to do this deeper work and have these deeper conversations, right? And so even as we're talking, I'm even noticing in my own body the frustration that I've been having over the past couple years with how people want to get in and they want to get out and they want to know how many sessions this is going to take and don't really want to do that deeper work and maybe develop a higher ethic or try to what re-embody some of those other emotions. And so that is always present as we're having these conversations as well. And comes up with my interns. We'll sit and have some of these beautiful conversations like I'm having with you, and I'll tell them this isn't necessarily some of the work you'll ever get to do because of the way some people via capitalism really approach even the therapeutic relationship, not to mention their own personal and primary relationships. So I feel like that needs dismantling too, so we can even get back to doing this work.
Yeah, that takes us back to the question of how the capitalist system is not designed for, how therapy best works or best
Yes.
operates. It's designed to, measure and alleviate symptomology. About a year ago, I decided I need a reality check, so I currently work about 20 hours in a public mental health clinic with autistic kids and their families, so I can understand, types of issues that I never get to see in my private practice, which is tends to be with more well-heeled clientele. And it's given me a reality check of being able to understand, like, where, everybody puts their pants on, like, one leg at a time, and as there's certain human similarities, but also some of the cultural differences I see between, people who don't have to worry about where the next meal is coming from the people that do. And sometimes an aspiration of growth, uh, is contrary to, like, what has to, like, happen today in order for us to be able to have a tomorrow. And it seems to me that if we can ever get to a point where more people have their true needs met more often, we might have a cultural foundation that might allow us to aspire more towards loftier goals or being better
Amen.
humans.
Amen. Truly. Amen. Yes. I started my career doing behavioral mental health work as well. It's a really beautiful wake up call and reminder. But yes, agree with where you land with that 100%.
Is there anything else that you would like to ask me about where I'm coming from around this? I know I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but I I kinda like some of the questions you've asked me, and I'd like to, like, give you another chance to throw one at me.
I like the version of you I'm coming to learn that you are. When I went on your website, I was very excited to see what you've been influenced by and the commonalities in that. When you very quickly said a moment ago, I needed a reality check. So I started to do some, community care. What are some of the other current processes or technologies, or however you want to frame it, that you have found to be very meaningful and beneficial to you in terms of trying to like live in the world in the way you think you should or want to? So maybe it's also about clinical work, but I also am always interested in what people like you, who I've come to through the short time I've sat with you, really come to respect. What other processes are you using in your current life for transformation?
That's a really good question. Well, about 6 months ago, my son passed away. He was 51. He died of colon cancer after a really good fight of about 3 years, and I was with him, by his side when he passed, and that was a transformative experience for me, and, it made me think about, the role that, mortality plays in the work that we do, and the notion of becoming the best versions of ourselves, by being humble and recognizing that, soon, this will come to an end. The world will go on, but we will not. I was deeply moved by Ernest Becker's work, although I thought he went a bit far, saying that everything in culture is basically a response to the knowledge of death, the fear of death. And having spent time with my son as he was fighting colon cancer, it made me realize that I needed to take everything I was doing much more seriously, and that's kind of what happened. I I started talking to my clients in a different way. I started being a little less sure of myself about what I believed to be true. I tried to say, "What's this?" more often than "What the hell is this?" And one of the reasons why I date all my blog posts is I want my readers to be able to understand that my thinking does change over time,
Yes.
and that everything I'm doing is sort of like toward an aspiration of more clarity, more understanding, not just because it's my job to help my clients, but it's my responsibility to help myself as a human being.
Mm.
So I don't know if that's a satisfactory answer, but it's the best.
It's 100% satisfactory and, in an odd synchronicity, exactly what I myself needed to hear, at this time in my own life, because I'm on somewhat of a parallel journey, and it often can feel like a lot of individuals aren't quite trying to, live more curiously, live more in capital T truth, and that kind of perspective. And I just went through my own loss, and I'm just happened a couple days ago, and I'm still trying to figure out how I want it to change me and what I want to walk away from it with. And that was a really beautiful narrative that I myself might adopt in some ways, and I feel that percolating on my own.
I'm sorry for your loss,
Thank you.
but I could totally relate to how within the context of a loss, we look for meaning. And when we find meaning, I feel that we begin to have what we need in order to uh, I can't say make sense of loss. That sounds a little bit too neat, but to encounter loss.
Yes.
in a deeper, more human way than just reactive fear. So,
Beautifully
uh,
said. Beautifully
well,
said. I've been taking some notes through the duration of sitting with you, some things I want to go back and look at or think more deeply about. I appreciate that. I do a lot of podcasts at times, and rare is it that I walk away having learned much. It's often quite superficial. So I really appreciate the depth of your thought process, especially today. So thank you for that.
I really enjoyed this conversation with you greatly. I'm happy for the surprising directions it went into, and just in my own journey of understanding, I'm becoming much more open to looking at what it means to be human, to be intimate, uh, to work in that relationship. But the takeaway that I have is the clarity with what you said that attachment is interpersonal, but differentiation is the intrapersonal relationship with yourself within the attachment
Yes.
itself. That's the best definition I've ever heard,
Well said.
explaining those 2 ideas that are tossed around by therapists quite casually nowadays, if I say that, but, that was very helpful for me to understand and think about.
Well, thank you.
Dr. Chris Donaghue, thank you so much. I really appreciate this conversation greatly.
My pleasure. Thank you.